The snow fell in sheets that night, turning Milan's glittering financial district into a blur of white and gold. I pressed my palm against the frosted window of La Perliniera, watching taxis crawl past while my feet throbbed in shoes I'd resoled twice. Inside, the restaurant hummed with wealth I'd never touch, crystal-catching candlelight, laughter that cost more than my rent. "Table 12 needs water," Marco hissed, and I turned back to the controlled chaos of service, invisible again. I'd been waiting tables here for 8 months, long enough to recognize the regulars by their cologne and the weight of their silences. But tonight felt different. A VIP reservation had cleared the entire upper gallery, security detail stationed at the stairs like marble statues in wool coats. I caught glimpses as I moved through my section: dark suits, careful posture, a table set for 6 that commanded the room without raising a single voice. "Don't stare," Marco muttered, balancing a tray of champagne flutes. "That's not for us to see." But I'd already seen him, not seated with the others, standing by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the storm with the stillness of someone who'd learned to wait. Tall, precise in a charcoal suit that made expensive look easy, dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples. When he turned, his gaze swept the floor below and stopped on me for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to catalog, long enough to mark. My phone buzzed against my hip. I ignored it through the next 3 courses, through the careful ballet of clearing plates and refreshing wine, through the mounting anxiety that came with every glance at the clock. Finally, during a lull, I ducked into the narrow hallway by the kitchen and answered. "Nana," my voice shifted into Croatian before I thought to stop it, muscle memory from childhood. "What's wrong?" "Luna srce moj," her breathing rattled, wet and labored. "I fell. I couldn't get up for maybe an hour. I'm okay now, but—" The rest blurred. She downplayed, I knew that pattern, but the shake in her voice told what her words wouldn't. "I promised to come after my shift, promised to call the clinic in the morning, promised everything while my hands went cold with the arithmetic of how much I didn't have." When I returned to the floor, something had shifted. One of the security men stood by the service station, speaking quietly with Marco, who kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't read. "They want you upstairs," he said finally, "for service. I do tables 1 through 8, that's. They asked for you specifically." He looked uneasy. "Just go and Luna, be smart." The gallery felt different from below, quieter, the air heavier with unspoken agreements. 5 men at the table, ranging from silver-haired to barely 30, watching me approach with the collective patience of people who knew time bent around them, not the other way around. He stood at the window still, but turned as I reached the table. "You speak Croatian," he said. Not a question. His Italian carried the faintest northern inflection, Milan by way of somewhere harder. "Yes." I kept my hands still at my sides, years of service training holding me upright. "Fluently, you could translate complex business terms, legal language." Yes, my grandmother raised me on it. I studied literature before I stopped, before I'd run out of money, before this." He considered me for a long moment, then gestured to the chair nearest him. The other men had gone carefully neutral, their attention a physical weight. "Sit." I remained standing. "I'm working." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or appreciation. "Marco has been told you're attending to a private client matter. Sit, please. I'm not in the habit of conducting business while someone's feet are aching." That stopped me. I sat. He claimed the chair across from me, close enough that I caught his scent, something clean and dark, cedar and citrus, the kind of fragrance that whispered rather than announced. "My name is Dante Kovac. I own this restaurant, among other holdings. I have a problem that requires someone fluent in Croatian, discreet, and capable of moving through spaces where, let's say, official channels would complicate matters. You need money for your grandmother's medical care. I heard you on the phone." Heat flooded my face. "That was a private." "Yes, it was, and I apologize for the intrusion, But opportunity doesn't wait for permission. He slid a card across the table, heavy stock, minimal text. A phone number, nothing more. I'm offering you a position as translator and assistant for a series of meetings over the next 2 months. The compensation would be 15,000 euros, half in advance. Your hours here would be accommodated. The number hit like cold water. 15,000. Nana's medications. The specialist in Zurich my research had turned up. Rent paid 6 months ahead. What kind of meetings? Import-export negotiations with partners in Zagreb and Dubrovnik. Perfectly legal but sensitive. Cultural nuances matter. He leaned back, and the motion carried no threat, just the confidence of someone who'd made this offer knowing I'd see both the door and the chain. You would travel with me, stay in appropriate accommodations, and maintain absolute discretion about what you hear. In return, I handle your grandmother's medical needs through my contacts. A Swiss pulmonary specialist I know owes me a favor. Why me? Because you're invisible here. You move through this room and no one really sees you, but you see everything. And because when your grandmother called, you didn't hesitate. Loyalty like that is rare. I need someone I can trust to hear sensitive information and understand that some doors, once opened, require careful handling. One of the men at the table cleared his throat softly. Dante's attention never wavered from my face. Think about it tonight. Call me tomorrow before noon. If you agree, we leave for Zagreb in 3 days. He stood, smooth and final. The advance would be transferred upon your acceptance. And Luna, he paused. The number I heard you discussing with your grandmother for that clinic, insufficient. The specialist alone will require 8,000 for a consultation and treatment plan. You don't have time to wait tables toward that goal. He knew my name, he knew my situation, and he was right. I took the card. His fingers brushed mine briefly, warm, deliberate. One question, I said. What happens if I say no? Nothing. You return to your section, I find another solution, and we both continue as before. But I suspect you've already done the math. I had, and the sum was this. I couldn't afford to refuse. I'll call tomorrow, I managed. Good, he gestured, and one of the security detail materialized with an envelope. Your shift is covered for tonight. That's 1,000 euros. Consider it a gesture of good faith or payment for your time this evening. Get home to your grandmother. The roads are dangerous in this storm. I stood on shaking legs, the envelope heavy in my hands. As I turned to leave, his voice followed me, quiet enough that only I would hear. You'll find I keep my promises, Luna, all of them. The snow had turned vicious by the time I reached the street, but I barely felt the cold. I thought of Nana in our cramped apartment, of the weight of the envelope in my bag, of the way Dante Kovac had looked at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me, like I was something valuable he'd only just discovered. I didn't know then that invisibility was about to become the most dangerous gift I'd ever possessed. Or that by morning, I'd already be his. The taxi dropped me at our building in Lambrate just after midnight, the streets empty except for the snow. I took the stairs 2 at a time. The elevator had been broken since August, and found Nana sitting at the kitchen table despite my texts telling her to rest. Luna, she reached for me with trembling hands, her face gray beneath the warm lamplight. You didn't need to come tonight. The storm. Stop. I knelt beside her chair, taking in the details I'd been too far away to see during our call. The bruise blooming along her left cheekbone, the way she held her ribs when she breathed. You said you fell. Where? By the bathroom, dizzy spell. It passed. It wouldn't pass. Her condition had been worsening for months. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the doctors called it. Lungs compromised by years working in textile factories without proper ventilation. Every breath was a battle she was slowly losing. I made tea neither of us wanted and told her about the offer. She listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes cataloging what I didn't say. This man, she said finally, Dante Kovac, that's a Croatian name. He said he has business in Zagreb. And what kind of business requires such discretion? I thought of the careful neutrality of those men at the table, the security detail, the weight of Dante's silence. I didn't ask. But you suspect. I suspect lots of things don't get asked in Milan's financial district. I wrapped my hands around my mug. Nana, 15,000 euros, the specialist in Zurich. Real treatment, not just managing symptoms. She was quiet for a long time. Snow tapped against the window, the radiator clanking its feeble protest against the cold. Finally, your grandfather once told me that every gift from a powerful man comes with a price, even if he doesn't name it up front. Especially if he doesn't name it up front. I'll be careful. Will you? She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. Her skin felt papery, fragile. Luna, SRCE mode, you've always seen the best in people. It's one of the things I love most about you. But men like this, men who can make medical specialists appear with a phone call, who own restaurants and speak of sensitive business, they don't operate on kindness. They operate on leverage. Then I'll make sure he doesn't have any over me. The moment you accept his money, he already does. But we both knew I'd already decided. The envelope in my bag held proof. I'd counted it 3 times on the taxi ride home, each €100 note a small green permission slip for hope. I called the number on the card at 9 the next morning, after a sleepless night listening to Nana's labored breathing through our apartment's thin walls. Yes, Dante's voice carried the same controlled warmth as his expression had, present but measured. I accept, but I have conditions. A pause, then with what might have been approval, go on. My grandmother's care comes first. Any conflicts, I choose her. And I want everything in writing, payment terms, job description, duration. Nothing verbal. Agreed, you'll have a contract by this afternoon. Anything else? If I see something illegal. You won't, he cut in smoothly. What you'll see is business conducted in the spaces between regulations. Aggressive, perhaps. Ethically gray, possibly. But I don't put civilians at risk, and I don't involve people in matters they haven't explicitly agreed to handle. Your role is translation and cultural liaison, nothing more. And if it becomes more, then you walk away with every cent I've promised you and we part professionally. His tone shifted, warming slightly. Luna, I'm not interested in coercing you. I'm interested in your skills and your judgment. The latter is demonstrated by these questions. Keep asking them. The contract arrived via courier at 2, printed on heavy paper with a law firm's letterhead that suggested money moved in large, quiet amounts. I read every word twice. The terms were exactly as stated. 2 months, 15,000 euros, travel to Zagreb and Dubrovnik, translator and assistant duties, discretion clause with steep financial penalties both ways. At the bottom, a handwritten note. Your grandmother's appointment with Dr. Werner in Zurich is scheduled for next Friday. My assistant Sophia will coordinate travel and accommodation. DK. Next Friday, 5 days away. I've been trying to get Nana on Dr. Werner's waiting list for 4 months. I signed. The money appeared in my account within the hour. 7,500 euros that made my banking app look temporarily glitched. I stared at the number until my eyes blurred, then called the clinic and paid 3 months of Nana's medication in advance. When I told her, she took my face in both hands and kissed my forehead. Promise me something, she said. Promise you'll remember who you are. Rich men's worlds make everything look different, brighter, easier. But you're not a girl who takes the easy path. You're a girl who asks questions. I promise. And Luna, if you see danger, real danger, run. Don't think about the money, don't think about me, just run. I promised that too, not knowing then how soon I'd have to weigh that promise against everything else I'd become. Sophia called that evening, crisp voice, efficient warmth, the kind of assistant who made impossible things materialize through sheer competence. She outlined the travel schedule. I'd be picked up Thursday at 6 a.m., driven to Malpensa for a private flight to Zagreb. 2 days of meetings, returned Sunday, then Zurich on Friday for Nana's appointment. Mr. Kovac prefers to brief in person, she added. He'll review protocols during the flight. Do you have appropriate business attire? I looked at my closet, waitress blacks and university cast-offs. I can manage. I'll have a stylist send options tomorrow. Consider it part of the position. You're representing Mr. Kovac's interests. Image matters in these spaces. The stylist arrived Wednesday with garment bags that made our small apartment feel suddenly shabby. Not flashy, that would draw the wrong attention, but expensive in the way that whispered rather than shouted. Tailored trousers, silk blouses in neutral tones, a wool coat that fit like it had been made for my shoulders. Mr. Kovac was specific about the aesthetic, the stylist said, pinning a hem. Professional, confident, understated. You're his representative, not his accessory. He wants you taken seriously. I tried not to think about how precisely Dante had assessed what I'd need, or how he'd known my size without asking. Thursday morning arrived too quickly. I kissed Nana goodbye in the pre-dawn dark, promising to call from Zagreb, and found the car waiting exactly where Sophia had said it would be, a dark sedan with tinted windows, driver already holding the door. The interior smelled of leather and the same cedar citrus scent I'd caught on Dante that first night. He sat in the back, reviewing something on a tablet, dressed for travel in dark trousers and a gray sweater that made the silver at his temples more pronounced. Luna, he looked up as I settled across from him, his gaze taking in the clothes his assistant had provided. Good, you look like someone who belongs in the room. That's half the battle. And the other half, knowing when to speak and when to listen. He set the tablet aside. We have 40 minutes to the airport. Let me explain what you're walking into. He outlined the Zagreb meetings with clinical precision. A warehouse negotiation with partners who controlled shipping logistics through the Adriatic, contract disputes, requiring someone who understood both the language and the cultural hierarchies embedded in Croatian business practice. Import-export, as he'd said, but I heard the spaces between his words where other transactions might flow. Your job is simple, he continued. Translate accurately, pay attention to subtext, what they say versus what they mean, flag inconsistencies, and maintain absolute discretion about anything you hear. And if they ask who I am, my consultant, nothing more, nothing less. He leaned back, studying me. They'll test you. Some will be dismissive, a woman, young, probably just there for decoration. Others will try to speak directly to you, bypassing me to see if you'll break protocol. Don't take the bait. Everything goes through me. Even if they're offering relevant information. Especially then, in these spaces, information is currency. Offering it cheaply is either stupidity or trap. Assume trap. The driver navigated through Milan's waking streets, past markets opening their shutters and cafes steaming with morning espresso. I watched Dante peripherally, trying to reconcile the careful courtesy he showed me with the man those warehouse owners would meet. Something shifted in him as we left the city, a subtle hardening, the warmth I'd glimpsed cooling into something sharper. At Malpensa, we bypassed the main terminal for a private aviation section I'd never known existed. Security waved us through, and within minutes we were boarding a jet that held 8 seats in cream leather, all empty except for us. Coffee? Dante gestured to a station where expensive machinery gleamed. Or something stronger. The flight's just over an hour, but we should arrive prepared. I chose coffee. He made it himself, precise movements, the ritual apparently soothing, and handed me a cup that tasted like it cost more than my former hourly wage. As we reached cruising altitude, he produced a folder. Background. The primary contact is Marko Juric, family operation that's held the split shipping corridor for 3 generations. Conservative, traditional, deeply Catholic. His son Tomislav is the one actually running operations now, but every deal requires Marco's blessing. The tension between them is our opportunity. What kind of tension? Tomislav wants to expand into less traditional markets. Marco wants to maintain the old agreements, old partners, old ways. We're offering them infrastructure they can't access through conventional channels, refrigerated storage, customs relationships, distribution networks into Western Europe. But we need guarantees of exclusive access. And if they won't give exclusivity, then we find another partner and their competitors absorb their market share within 18 months. He said it matter-of-factly, laying out economic pressure like weather patterns. Business is leverage, Luna. Find what someone needs, make yourself the only supplier, maintain terms that benefit both parties. The moment it becomes one-sided, the arrangement collapses. I thought of my own arrangement, 15,000 euros, my grandmother's health, the invisible strings I'd felt when I signed that contract. Is that what this is? You found what I needed. He met my eyes directly. Yes, but I'm keeping my end fairly. You'll see that over time. Trust isn't given in my world, Luna. It's earned through demonstrated consistency. I'll show you mine. Watch. The jet banked slightly, sun catching the wing outside my window. For a moment I felt suspended, not quite returned to my old life, not yet certain of this new one. Dante returned to his tablet, giving me space to process, and I wondered if that too was calculated. Probably. Everything about him seemed intentional, down to the way he'd positioned his chair to give me the window seat. Give you the view, I thought, but keep you contained within it. Sophia had messaged coordinates for our Zagreb hotel, not the tourist heart, but a quieter neighborhood where old Austro-Hungarian buildings stood dignified against the morning light. Dante moved through the arrival process with the ease of someone who traveled constantly, his presence commanding immediate attention without apparent effort. Staff materialized, paperwork vanished, and suddenly we were in another black car headed into the city. Meeting start at 2, he said, checking his watch. That gives you 3 hours to settle and review the technical vocabulary I've sent to your phone. We're discussing cold chain logistics and customs harmonization procedures. Dry material, but the details matter. These are the points where money and risk intersect, and where translation can shift millions. Exactly. He looked pleased. You're already thinking in the right terms. Good. One more thing. He reached into his jacket and produced a small velvet box. Inside, a delicate gold bracelet set with small diamonds, beautiful but not ostentatious. You'll wear this to the meetings. I stared at it. I don't understand. In traditional Croatian business culture, women in professional settings need to signal their status carefully. Too plain suggests you're not valued. Too flashy suggests you're an ornament. This, he lifted the bracelet, says you're under my protection and worthy of respect. It's a signal, not a leash. It looks expensive. It's appropriate. There's a difference. He fastened it around my wrist, his fingers careful and impersonal. You'll return it when the contract ends, but while you're representing me, you represent me properly. Sophia has additional pieces for different contexts. Think of it as a uniform. But it felt heavier than that. The diamonds caught the light as the car moved, and I understood. I was being marked. Gently, elegantly, but unmistakably. This was his world now, and everything in it, including me, would bear his signature. The hotel was understated luxury, the kind where wealth spoke in thread counts rather than chandeliers. Dante had booked a suite with connecting rooms, his space and mine, a door between that could lock from both sides. Rest if you need it, he said, handing me a key card. I have calls to make. I'll knock at 1:30. I spent the time memorizing vocabulary I thought I knew and discovering how much I didn't. Karenska uskladiven, customs harmonization. Lanak h ladnia, cold chain. Isključivo pravo distribucija, exclusive distribution rights. Each phrase carried weight beyond its literal meaning. implications that could shift thousands of containers through ports I'd never see. At 1:20, I changed into one of the outfits Sophia had selected: black trousers, ivory silk blouse, the wool coat. The bracelet glinted at my wrist. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Polished, professional, expensive. Belonging. Dante's knock came precisely on time. When I opened the connecting door, he changed into a charcoal suit, the kind of tailoring that made 6 feet of controlled danger look like legitimate business. "Perfect," he said, his gaze assessing but not lingering. "Ready." "As I'll ever be." "Confidence, Luna. You know more than they do about what I need. That makes you valuable. Remember that if anyone tries to make you feel otherwise." The warehouse district was exactly what I'd expected. Industrial architecture softened by age, buildings that had seen empires rise and fall, and now hosted the quiet machinery of modern commerce. Our driver pulled into a gated lot where 2 other vehicles waited, men in weather-beaten jackets smoking by the entrance. They straightened as we approached. Dante greeted them in serviceable Croatian, formal and respectful, and they led us inside to an office that smelled of coffee and old concrete. Marko Juric waited there, 70s, silver-haired, wearing authority like a comfortable sweater. Beside him, Tomislav, sharp-eyed and impatient, maybe 40. "Mr. Kovac," Marko extended his hand, "you bring an associate." "My consultant, Luna Marek. She'll be handling translation nuances for the contract review." Marco's gaze flicked over me, dismissive but not hostile. "We have translators." "I prefer my own." Dante's tone allowed no argument. "Shall we begin?" What followed was 3 hours of the most intense focus I'd ever maintained. They spoke quickly, mixing standard Croatian with regional dialects, peppering technical terms with casual asides meant to seem unimportant. But I caught them: the small modifications to quantities, the suggested timeline shifts, the way Tomislav would propose something that subtly undermined the exclusivity Dante required. I translated everything precisely, and between translations, I leaned close to Dante and murmured the subtext in Italian. "He's trying to keep the Hungarian route open. That contradicts exclusivity." Dante never showed surprise. He'd simply pivot, addressing the concern directly in a way that made it seem he'd caught it himself. By the second hour, Tomislav had stopped trying to slip things past me. By the third, he was speaking to me directly with grudging respect. "Your consultant has sharp ears," Marco said finally, when we'd reached a natural pause. "Where did you find her?" "Milan," Dante said smoothly, "where all the best talents migrate eventually. Coffee." The break let me breathe. I stepped outside into the fatting afternoon, where the Adriatic wind cut through the warehouse yards and reminded me this was real. Not a fever dream of money and diamonds, but actual stakes, actual power being negotiated in careful increments. "You did well." Dante appeared beside me, close enough that I felt his warmth against the cooling air. "Better than well. Tomislav respects you now. That changes the dynamic in our favor." "He was testing me." "Of course, and you passed, which means tomorrow's session will be smoother. They'll take the negotiations seriously instead of treating them as theater for my benefit." He paused. "Jurek wants to host dinner tonight. His home, family style. I need you there." "Why?" "Because Croatian business is built on personal relationships. Marco needs to see you as a person he can trust, not just a translator. Can you do that? Be yourself, but carefully." I thought of Nana, of the Zurich appointment 3 days away, of the diamond bracelet on my wrist that meant I was already too far in to turn back now. "Yes." "Good," he smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen since we'd left Milan. "Then let's show them that Kovac's people are worth knowing." Marco's home was a revelation. Not ostentatious wealth, but solid, generational comfort. 3 stories of Austro-Hungarian architecture on Zagreb's outskirts, warm lights spilling through windows where family photos documented decades of gatherings. His wife Katerina met us at the door, her welcome genuine despite the late notice. "Any friend of Marco's," she said in Croatian, taking my hands. "And such a pretty girl. Come, come, you must be exhausted from travel." The dining room held 15 people. The Jurek extended family, Tomislav's wife and teenage children, Marco's sister and her family. They absorbed us into the gathering like we'd always belonged, and I found myself seated between Katerina and Tomislav's daughter Anna, who wanted to practice her English and asked breathless questions about Milan. Dante sat across from me beside Marco, and I watched him navigate the meal with the same precision he brought to business. He praised Katerina's cooking, asked thoughtful questions about family history, showed genuine interest in Anna's university plans. Nothing felt performed, or rather, the performance was so perfect it became indistinguishable from truth. "Your grandfather," Marco said to me during the main course. "Marek, that's a split name. Your family from the coast." "Originally, yes. My grandmother grew up in Makarska before moving to Italy for work." "Makarska?" Marco's eyes lit. "Beautiful. My father did business there in the 70s before things got complicated. What was her family name?" "Tomic. Her maiden name was Elena Tomic." Something shifted in Marco's expression, recognition perhaps, or memory. Tomic. There was a Tomic who ran the fishing cooperative. Good people, hard workers. Beside me, Dante had gone very still. I felt his attention sharpen, though his expression never changed. "That was my great-uncle," I said carefully. "I never met him. He died before I was born." "Hard times, the 80s, Marco said, his tone sympathetic. "Many good men lost everything when the old systems collapsed, but their families remember. That matters." The conversation moved on, but I felt the weight of what had just been exchanged. Some connection forged or discovered, threads of history intersecting in ways I didn't fully understand. Dante caught my eye across the table, a silent acknowledgement. "We'll discuss this later." After dinner, Marco invited Dante to see his study, which I understood meant private conversation, the real negotiation that happened after the public positioning. I helped Katerina clear plates, which earned her warm approval and Anna's friendship. By the time we returned to the hotel near midnight, I felt wrung out from maintaining careful balance for 8 straight hours. "Your performance tonight secured the deal," Dante said in the car. His tie was loosened, the first sign of fatigue I'd seen. "Marco trusts you. That extends to me by association." "What about my grandfather's family? Did you know?" "No, but I'm researching now." He showed me his phone, where Sophia had apparently already compiled a preliminary report. The Tomic Fishing Cooperative was significant in the 70s, contracted with Yugoslav shipping interests for distribution. When the wars came, the cooperative collapsed. Several members died. Others disappeared into debt. Your great-uncle Petar Tomic among them. Why does it matter? Because business here has a long memory. Marco's father likely did trade with your great-uncle. If there were debts or obligations, they might still echo. Understanding that history helps me understand potential complications. He pocketed the phone. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we finalize terms. Day after, we're back in Milan in time for your grandmother's Zurich appointment." I went to my room but couldn't sleep. Instead, I called Nana, catching her just before bed. "How's Zagreb?" she asked, and I heard the careful neutrality in her voice. "Cold, professional. I'm learning a lot." "And this man, Dante Kovac?" I thought about how to answer that. Complicated, careful, he keeps his promises so far. A long pause, then, "Luna, be honest with me, is he famiglia?" Famiglia, the Italian euphemism that meant organized crime, legacy power, the structures that ran parallel to governments. "I don't know," I said finally, "but I think so. Nothing he's done is illegal, but the way people respond to him. There's weight there, authority that doesn't come from legitimate business alone." Then everything I said before still holds. Watch yourself. And Luna, the Tomic family, your great-uncle Petter. There are things I haven't told you about what happened to him. What things? Things I'll explain when you're home. But know this. If Marco Jurek remembers our family, it's not just because of fishing cooperatives. Your great-uncle was involved in things that got him killed. Be very careful about what doors that connection might open. We hung up, and I lay awake listening to Zagreb's night sounds through expensive windows, feeling the bracelet's weight on my wrist, and wondering what exactly I'd inherited along with my grandmother's maiden name. The morning meeting went exactly as Dante had predicted, smoother, more direct, Marco and Tomislav negotiating seriously now that they'd measured us as people worth their time. By noon, we'd signed preliminary agreements, with final terms to be reviewed by lawyers before a formal contract next month. You did exactly what I needed, Dante said on the flight back to Milan. Better, even. You read the room, read the people. That's rare. My grandmother warned me about my great-uncle, about the Tomic family history. I know, Sophia's full report came through this morning. He handed me his tablet. Your great-uncle Petter was more than a fisherman. In the 70s, he ran logistics for parties moving goods through Split that couldn't use official channels. Medicine, machinery, sometimes currency. When Yugoslavia fractured, those networks became targets. He died in 1987, officially a boating accident, but the timing suggests otherwise. Someone killed him. Someone made him disappear when his knowledge became inconvenient. The question is who, and whether any debts from that arrangement carried forward. Marco's father Josip was connected to those same networks. If your great-uncle owed Josip or vice versa when he died, that ledger might still be open. Why would that matter now? Because in this world, debts are inherited. If the Jurek family believes they owe your family something, or that your family owes them, it could complicate our arrangement. I need to understand those complications before they become problems. He took the tablet back. That said, right now it works in our favor. Marco feels a connection to you, which strengthens his trust in me. We'll watch how it develops. I thought about being a complication, a variable in an equation I barely understood. I should know more about what I'm stepping into. You should, and I'll tell you what I can when I can. But some knowledge is dangerous, Luna. The more you know about certain operations, the more exposure you have if things ever go wrong. Right now you're a translator. You have plausible deniability. Don't ask to give that up unless you're certain you can carry the weight. And if I want to know anyway? He looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Then I'll tell you, but not today. Let's get your grandmother through Zurich first, one obligation at a time. The Switzerland trip was everything Dante had promised. First-class train tickets, a suite at a hotel with views of the Alps, Dr. Werner's private clinic, where Nana spent 4 hours undergoing tests I couldn't afford to imagine the cost of. I sat in the waiting room with Dante, who worked on his laptop while I tried to read and couldn't focus. She'll be fine, he said eventually, not looking up. Werner is the best. If there's a treatment option, he'll find it. And if there isn't, then he'll tell us honestly and we'll make her comfortable. But let's not assume the worst. Dr. Werner called us in at 4. Nana sat on the examination table looking small and tired, but her eyes were sharp when we entered. Your grandmother's condition is advanced, Dr. Werner said, his English precise. However, there's a new therapy combination, targeted inhalers plus a biologic treatment that's shown promise for patients with her inflammatory markers. It won't cure her, but it could stabilize her decline significantly, perhaps by several years of good quality life. What's the cost? I asked before Dante could. Approximately €4,000 every 3 months for the biologics, plus monitoring visits. The first year would be the most intensive. €16,000 annually, more than my salary at La Perla Nera. Impossible. Start the treatment, Dante said. My office will handle the billing and schedule. Dr. Werner nodded, unfazed, and turned to explain the protocol to Nana in careful detail. She listened, asked intelligent questions, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Afterwards, in the car back to the hotel, she was quiet until we were alone. "He paid," she said. "It wasn't a question. It's part of the arrangement. Luna, that's not a salary, that's a debt. He made me a promise about your care. He's keeping it." She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I'm grateful, truly, but understand what this means. Every treatment, every extension of my life becomes weight on your conscience. If you try to walk away from whatever he's involving you in, you'll carry guilt about what happens to me. That's how obligations work. They feel like gifts until you try to leave. Then I won't try to leave until you're stable." And after, I didn't have an answer for that. That night, Dante knocked on my door around 10. I'd been staring at my laptop, trying to draft an email to the university about deferred tuition, when his quiet knock interrupted. "Walk with me," he asked when I opened the door. "The hotel has grounds. It helps to move after days like this." The Swiss night was cold and clear, stars sharp overhead like diamond points. We walked through gardens that smelled of fatting roses and early frost, not touching but close enough that I felt his presence as a deliberate thing. "Your grandmother's right to be suspicious," he said finally. "About what this costs you, I want you to know I'm aware of the leverage I'm creating. It's not accidental." "Why tell me that?" "Because I'd rather you see it clearly than resent it later. You're smart, Luna, smart enough to feel the shape of this arrangement even if I don't name it. So I'm nomming it. I'm giving you what you need, and in return I'm earning your loyalty. That's the transaction. At least you're honest about it." "I try to be with you anyway." He stopped walking, turning to face me directly. "I could lie, tell you this is altruism, that I'm helping because it's right. But you'd see through that eventually, and then you'd never trust me again. This way," he gestured between us, "you know exactly what I am, what we are to each other. Employer and employee, yes, but also something more permanent. I take care of what's mine, and you're becoming mine." That should terrify me. Does it? I considered that honestly, not as much as it should. He smiled then, something genuine breaking through the careful control. "That's why I chose you. You're clear-eyed enough to see the game, but pragmatic enough to play it anyway. Most people are one or the other. You're both." We walked back in silence, and at my door he paused. "2 more months," he said. "Then we renegotiate. If you want to walk away, you can, with the full payment, your grandmother's treatment secured through year's end, and no hard feelings. But I'm going to make staying the more attractive option, just so you know what's coming." "Why?" "Because you're valuable, and because—" He stopped, something flickering across his face that looked almost vulnerable. "Because it's been a long time since I've been around someone who asks questions instead of just complying. I find I like the challenge." He left before I could respond. Back in Milan, something shifted. The remaining 6 weeks of my contract became a rhythm. 3 more trips to Zagreb to finalize the Zurich agreement. 2 to Dubrovnik for meetings with shipping partners whose names I learned not to write down. Between trips, I returned to La Perla, but worked different hours now. The evening shift that kept me visible to Milan's evening power circles. Dante appeared at the restaurant once a week, always with different associates, always requesting me specifically for service. At first I thought it was possessiveness, but I came to understand it was something else. He was introducing me, quietly, to his network, training them to see me as someone who belonged in their spaces. "You're being cultivated," Marco said one night after service. "Be careful, Luna. Men like Kovac don't do anything without long-term planning." "I know." "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like you're getting comfortable. That new coat, those boots, that's not waitress money." "I'm doing translation work." "I know what you're doing, and I'm not judging. I'm warning. In 3 months, you've gone from invisible to visible in exactly the circles where being noticed can be dangerous. Just keep your exits clear. But my exits were already closing. Nana's treatment was working, not dramatically, but she could walk upstairs again without stopping, could laugh without gasping. Every improvement felt like proof that staying was worth it. Every improvement made leaving harder. During our 7th trip to Zagreb, Marco invited us to his family's house on Hvar for a long weekend. Not business, pleasure, he insisted, just good food and better company. Dante accepted, and suddenly I was on a ferry to an island I'd only seen in tourist photographs, wearing clothes that cost more than my security deposit, watching Dante navigate social spaces like he'd been born to them. Which perhaps he had been. "Tell me about your family," I said on the ferry, emboldened by salt air and the way distance made questions safer. Not much to tell. My father built a logistics company in the 90s. I inherited it, expanded it, made it legitimate in the ways that matter to regulators. And the ways that don't matter to regulators. He smiled. Those expanded too. My father understood that business is about solving problems people can't solve through official channels. I just continued his philosophy. Is he still? He died 5 years ago. Heart attack. Quick and relatively painless, which is more mercy than most men in his position receive. No emotion in his voice, just fact. My mother lives in Como now, remarried. We don't speak often. I'm sorry. Don't be. We all make choices about what we can carry. She chose peace. I chose legacy. Neither is wrong. At the Jurek house on Hvar, I met a different version of everyone. Relaxed, warm, 3 generations swimming in a cerulean cove and grilling fish caught that morning. Marco's grandchildren climbed on him like a beloved oak, and Katerina moved through her kitchen with the confidence of someone who'd fed armies and loved it. "You should stay in Croatia," Anna said to me during a late afternoon swim. "Find a nice Zagreb boy, settle down. Milan is all concrete and stress." "I like concrete and stress," I said, but even as I spoke I felt the pull of this different life, simpler maybe, or at least less calculating. The kind of life where your grandfather's debts didn't still echo across decades. That night, after dinner and local wine and songs I didn't know but could feel in my bones, I found Dante on the stone terrace overlooking the water. The Adriatic stretched dark beneath a crescent moon, boats bobbing like patient thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, joining him at the railing. "Exit strategies." I laughed, surprised. That seems off-brand. Every good plan includes an ending. The Jurek deal is solid now. We're moving into implementation, which means the infrastructure I built through you is established. You'll have completed what I hired you for. And then, he turned to face me, close enough that I smelled cedar and sea salt. Then I offer you a different arrangement, not contractor, something more permanent. As what? As whatever you want to be. Translator if that's comfortable, but you're capable of more. I've watched you learn this world, how to read rooms, how to hear what people don't say, how to move through spaces without disrupting them. Those are rare skills. I could use someone with them in my organization long term. Doing what exactly? Coordinating, managing relationships, being my eyes and ears in places where I can't be directly visible. He paused. Being someone I can trust. In exchange for salary that matches the responsibility, your grandmother's care indefinitely, and a place in a structure that rewards competence and loyalty above everything else. You'd be protected, Luna, not just from external threats but from the uncertainties you've been carrying alone. No more wondering if you can make rent. No more calculating whether you can afford medicine. Those problems end. It sounded like everything I'd been desperate for 8 months ago. Now, it sounded like something else, a door closing even as it opened, a choice that would define everything that came after. Can I think about it? Of course, but Luna, his hand came up, not touching me but close, a space between us that felt charged. I'm not just offering you a job. I'm offering you protection, stability, and a place in something larger than yourself. Those are increasingly rare commodities. Think carefully before you refuse them. He left me there on the terrace, and I stood watching moonlight on water and wondering when exactly I'd stopped planning my escape. The contract's official end came on a Tuesday in late November. 2 months exactly since that first snow-soaked night at La Perla, and Milan had turned cold again, the kind of damp chill that sank into bones and made warm spaces feel like salvation. Sofia delivered the final payment, €7,500, completing the promised 15,000, along with a new contract. 3 pages, employee rather than contractor status, benefits and salary that made the original amount look like pocket change. And at the bottom, handwritten, dinner tonight to discuss, 8 p.m. my office, DK. I went because I'd known I would go since HVAR, since Switzerland, since the moment I'd taken his card in La Perla, and felt the weight of everything it represented. His office occupied the top floor of a building in Porta Nuova, glass and steel and views of Milan's skyline transitioning from business district to residential neighborhoods where families lived lives I'd never touch now. Dante stood by the windows when I arrived, drink in hand, wearing the kind of casual elegance that only came with confidence so deep it didn't require costume. Luna, he turned, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before, uncertainty, maybe, or the vulnerability that came with wanting something you couldn't simply purchase. Thank you for coming. You knew I would. I hoped there's a difference. He poured me a glass of Barolo, expensive enough that the bottle alone could have paid a month's rent in my old life. I've been thinking about how to say this without sounding like I'm cornering you, but ultimately there's no way to dress it up. I want you to stay, not just professionally. That too, but he stopped, choosing words with unusual care. I've spent 5 years building structures around myself. Protection, isolation, control. And then you appeared, asking questions I'd stopped letting anyone ask, seeing complications I thought I'd hidden. You remind me that competence alone isn't sustainability. Eventually, you have to trust someone. I'd like to trust you. You already do, professionally at least. I'd like to trust you with more than that. The words hung between us, their meaning clear even unspoken. This wasn't just an employment offer. This was him declaring intention, not possession, but partnership of a kind that existed in the spaces between legal and legitimate, dangerous and comfortable. What does that mean practically? I asked, because I'd learned to demand clarity even when emotion pulled toward acceptance. It means you keep coordinating my relationships with the Jurek network and others we develop. It means you attend events with me as my partner, not my employee, building your own reputation, not just reflecting mine. It means I invest in your education if you want to return to university. It means your grandmother's care becomes my responsibility, not your burden. And it means, he set his glass down and closed the distance between us, that I'll stop pretending this is purely professional. I'll court you properly if you'll let me. Slowly, with respect for the fact that you have every reason to be cautious. Dante, you don't have to answer now. I'm giving you time. But I needed you to know what I'm offering isn't just money or security. It's a place beside me, not behind me. Partnership, not possession. Take whatever time you need to decide if that's something you want. He kissed me then, gently, a question rather than claim, his hand warm against my jaw. And I let him, because somewhere in the past 8 weeks I'd stopped being able to pretend I didn't want this too, despite knowing better. When we broke apart, I said, "This is a terrible idea." "Probably," he smiled against my temple, "but you're still here." "I'm still here." I didn't sign the new contract immediately. Instead, I went home to Nana and laid everything out. The offer, the implications, The fact that staying meant choosing Dante's world permanently. She listened while sipping tea the Swiss treatment had allowed her to enjoy again without gasping. "Do you love him?" she asked when I'd finished. "I barely know him." "That's not what I asked." "I could love him. That's what scares me. Because I don't think he operates on love, Nana. He operates on loyalty and obligation and structures that protect his interests, and I'd be one more interest to protect." "That's not necessarily worse than love," she said quietly. "Your grandfather loved me desperately and died broke because he kept trusting the wrong people. Dante Kavech doesn't sound like someone who trusts easily. If he's offering you partnership, he means it, even if his reasons are strategic. So I should take it." "I can't answer that, but I can tell you this. You've been carrying the weight of my survival for 2 years, working yourself to exhaustion, losing your education and your youth to keep us afloat. This man is offering to carry that weight with you. Maybe he has ulterior motives. Maybe he'll disappoint you. But right now, he's kept every promise he's made. That's worth something. Even if it means becoming part of his world permanently." "Luna, SRC emoji, you already are part of his world. You've been inside it for 2 months. The question isn't whether to enter, you've entered. The question is whether you'll acknowledge that and negotiate the best terms possible or pretend you can still walk away clean." She set down her cup. "He's right about one thing, you're not powerless here. He wants you specifically. That's leverage. Use it. Get what you need. Build the exit routes you require. But don't refuse stability out of pride or fear. Those are luxuries we can't afford." So I signed. Not the contract he'd offered, but a modified version negotiated through a lawyer I hired specifically to review it. One Sophia recommended, which should have felt circular, but instead felt like Dante respecting the process. I secured guaranteed education funding, explicit protections if the relationship ended badly, and veto power over assignments that violated clearly defined boundaries. When I delivered the revised contract to Dante's office, he read it carefully, smiled, and signed without argument. "I was hoping you'd negotiate," he said. "Shows you're thinking long-term, that's what I need." "What you need is someone who will keep you honest." "That too." He pulled me close, the gesture becoming familiar now, his warmth against the December cold. "Welcome to the organization, Luna Marek. Try not to regret it immediately." "I'll do my best." The winter that followed was education in everything I'd only glimpsed before. Dante walked me through his operations methodically, not the illegal elements, but the legitimate fronts that made everything else possible. Import licenses, customs relationships, distribution networks that moved refrigerated goods across Europe with efficiency that looked magical until you understood the infrastructure underneath. "The key is redundancy," he explained one day in his office, showing me organizational charts that looked like spider webs. "No single point of failure. If a route closes, 3 others activate. If a partner becomes compromised, competitors absorb their territory through market pressure, not violence. Everything legal on paper, everything defensible in court. The gray spaces are where we live, but we never cross into black. And if someone else crosses into black, they become a liability we can't associate with. The moment someone draws law enforcement attention that threatens our operations, we sever the connection completely. It's not personal, it's sustainability." I learned to read contracts for hidden dependencies, to recognize when someone was negotiating in good faith versus positioning for future leverage. I learned which lawyers could be trusted, which accountants asked too many questions, which government officials understood that certain efficiencies required flexible interpretation of regulations. And I learned Dante himself, not just the public version, but the private man who emerged during late nights in his apartment when work finally released its grip. He loved jazz, played piano competently, read voraciously across languages I didn't know he spoke. He'd been married briefly in his 20s to someone from a connected family, ended it amicably when they both admitted compatibility on paper didn't translate to actual partnership. "I don't do chaos," he told me once. "My father thrived on it, constantly reactive, putting out fires, running on adrenaline and instinct. It killed him at 52. I decided early I wanted a different model. Build systems, anticipate problems, create redundancies, stay cold." "You're not that cold." "With you, maybe. That's why you're dangerous." He said it like confession, tracing patterns on my shoulder in his darkened bedroom. "You make me want to believe in things I eliminated from my operational model years ago. Partnership, trust, the idea that someone can know what I am and stay anyway." "Is that what I'm doing, staying anyway?" "Aren't you?" I was. Despite knowing better, despite Nana's warnings, despite every rational voice that said men like Dante Kovach collected people like investments and divested when returns diminished. I stayed because he kept his promises, because he treated me like an equal partner even when I knew I wasn't, because somewhere in the careful negotiation of our arrangement, I'd started imagining futures that extended beyond quarterly reviews. But spring brought complications. The first sign was subtle, a meeting in Zagreb that Marco's son Tomislav requested personally, outside normal channels. Dante almost refused, uncomfortable with the breach in protocol, but ultimately agreed to a brief stop while we were already traveling through Split. Tomislav met us at a cafe near the old city, tense in a way I'd never seen him. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Someone's been asking questions about your relationship with my father, specifically about the exclusivity arrangements and whether they violate EU competition regulations." "Who?" Dante asked, his voice cooling into the dangerous neutrality I'd learned meant threat assessment. "Luka Novakovic, you know him." I watched Dante's face carefully and saw the micro-expression before he controlled it. Recognition, annoyance, and something that looked like old anger. "I know him. What's his interest?" "He's positioning himself to take over the Split corridor. Tried to buy in with my father directly, but Marco refused. Now he's trying to create regulatory pressure to force us to open our arrangements to competitive bidding." Tomislav leaned forward. "Dante, this man is connected to people who don't follow your rules about keeping everything legal. If he decides to make you a target, he'll use institutional weapons, financial police, EU regulators, whatever creates pressure. Are you prepared for that kind of scrutiny?" "My operations withstand scrutiny. That's the point of building them carefully." "Maybe, but Luna," Tomislav looked at me. "They're asking about her too. Who she is, why a translator is attending business meetings, whether there's more to the relationship than professional. If they establish she's personally involved with you, they'll use that to imply impropriety in our arrangements." I felt cold despite the Mediterranean sun. Use me how? To suggest Dante has undue influence over my father through family connections. Your great-uncle's history with my grandfather, your presence at family gatherings. It could be framed as inappropriate manipulation of business relationships. He grimaced. "I'm sorry. I like you both, but you need to understand what you're walking into." On the flight back to Milan, Dante was silent for the first hour, staring at his tablet without seeing it. Finally, "Luka Novakovic was one of my father's associates. They had a falling out in the 90s over territory. Luka wanted to expand into weapons trafficking. My father refused to provide logistics for that. Their partnership ended badly. He holds a grudge. He holds a vendetta. My father cost him millions by withholding critical distribution infrastructure. He's probably been waiting for an opportunity to target me ever since I took over." Dante set the tablet aside. "I need to be very careful here. If he's using regulatory pressure, I can't respond with traditional methods. It has to be legal, defensible, and public enough that any retaliation looks unwarranted." "What about me?" Tomislav said. "You're not a weapon he can use unless we give him ammunition, which means we need to be very clear about boundaries. No more family gatherings with the Jureks. No personal socializing that could be framed as manipulation. Everything strictly professional until this resolves. For how long? However long it takes. Luna, I'm sorry. I brought you into this and now you're exposed because of me. You're protecting me. I'm mitigating damage I caused. He reached across the aisle, taking my hand. I won't let him hurt you, whatever it takes, but I need you to trust me about the boundaries. I did because the alternative was worse. So I stepped back from visibility, still working, still coordinating, but behind scenes now, my presence at meetings limited to essential translations via secure video rather than in person. It felt like regression, like returning to invisibility after months of being seen. Nana noticed immediately. What happened? She asked when I'd been home 3 nights in a row instead of staying at Dante's apartment. I explained about Novakovic, about the regulatory pressure, about how my presence had become liability instead of asset. She listened without interrupting, then said quietly, "This is what I warned you about. The moment you become expensive to him, whether financially or politically, you become expendable. That's how these structures work. He's protecting me. He's protecting himself. You're part of that protection, yes, but only as long as protecting you doesn't cost him more than you're worth. Luna, I'm not saying he doesn't care for you. I believe he does in his way. But his world has rules, and rule one is always preserve the organization. If sacrificing you preserves the organization, he'll do it. Maybe regretfully, maybe generously, but he'll do it. You think I should leave? I think you should have an exit plan that doesn't depend on his permission or his generosity. Money saved in accounts he doesn't know about, documents copied, relationships outside his network, the tools to leave cleanly if you need to. I started building those tools the next day, hatting myself for the betrayal even as I recognized the necessity. A separate bank account, copies of key documents and contacts stored in encrypted cloud storage only I could access. Regular lunches with Marco from La Perlanera, maintaining connections to my old life. Dante either didn't notice or chose not to mention it. He was consumed with the Novakovic situation, which escalated rapidly. Formal complaints filed with EU competition authorities, financial police requesting documentation of our Croatian arrangements, pressure on Marco to testify about the nature of his relationship with Dante's organization. It's all defensible, Dante told me during one of our brief video calls. But defense requires time and money, and both create drag on operations. That's what he wants, to slow me down enough that other opportunities pass me by while I'm distracted defending against manufactured accusations. Is there a way to resolve it directly? Talk to him. Men like Luca don't negotiate. They maneuver until they've extracted everything valuable, then dispose of what's left. The only language he understands is pressure. I need to find his vulnerability and apply enough force that continuing the attack becomes more expensive than withdrawing. What kind of vulnerability? The kind I shouldn't discuss with you. The less you know about this particular solution, the safer you are. That should have reassured me. Instead, it felt like walls going up, like Dante compartmentalizing our relationship into the category of things that required protection from themselves. I understood the logic. I hated it anyway. The break came from an unexpected direction. During one of my now rare in-person meetings with the Jurek family, sanitized, brief, documentation-heavy, Marco's wife Katerina pulled me aside. "I've been thinking about your great-uncle," she said quietly. "About the Tomic family history. My mother knew your grandmother, did you know that? They worked together in Makarska in the 60s. I didn't know. Your grandmother Alina, she married Lorenzo Marek and moved to Italy, yes. But before that, she was engaged to someone else. Someone who worked with your great-uncle Peter in the fishing cooperative." I felt something shift, pieces rearranging. Who? Ivan Kovich, Dante's grandfather. The world tilted. That's not Dante's grandfather would have mentioned. Would he? This was before your grandmother met your grandfather, before the wars and all the complications. Ivan and Alina were young, engaged informally, working together to build something in Makarska. But then Ivan got involved with Petter's logistics work, the unofficial kind, the kind that eventually got Petter killed. Alina refused to marry into that life. She broke the engagement and moved to Milan, met your grandfather Lorenzo within a year. Ivan stayed in Croatia, eventually married Dante's grandmother, built the business that became Dante's father's empire. Does Dante know? I don't think so. These are old stories, old families. But if Luka Novakovic is researching your connection to Dante, he'll find this eventually. And he'll use it, proof that your involvement with Dante isn't just professional convenience but generational entanglement. That your families have been connected across decades, mixing business and personal in ways that violate the careful boundaries he's tried to maintain. I thanked her and left feeling like the ground had turned to water. Nana confirmed it that night, her face carefully neutral as I confronted her. I was going to tell you, she said, but the longer you were with Dante, the harder it became. Yes, I was engaged to his grandfather Ivan. Yes, I left him because I saw what that life would cost. And yes, that's probably why Marco Jurek felt a connection to you, because he knew the history, knew that our families had been entangled long before you met Dante at La Perla Nera. Did Dante orchestrate this? Did he know? I don't think so. I think it's coincidence or fate or the way old networks circle back on themselves. But Luna, this changes everything. Because now you're not just valuable to him professionally, you're proof of generational loyalty, of families that survived the wars and the chaos by binding themselves together. In his world, that's currency, proof of stability across time. Or proof that I'm a plant, that I've been positioned deliberately. Either way, you need to tell him, before Novakovic finds out and frames it as deception. I met Dante the next morning at a neutral location, a park in Simpione, public and open, where conversations couldn't be easily recorded. He looked tired, stress showing in the set of his shoulders. Luna, he reached for me but I stepped back. I need to tell you something about my grandmother, about your grandfather. I watched his face as I explained, watched him process and calculate, and finally arrive at the same realization I had. We'd never been free of this. Our family's histories had been circling each other for 60 years. Debt and obligation and broken promises creating the conditions that made our meeting feel like inevitability instead of chance. Did you know? I asked finally. No, my grandfather never spoke about his life before my grandmother, and my father, he stopped. My father rarely spoke about anything personal, just business, legacy, the need to maintain structures across generations. He looked at me directly. I didn't know, but I should have researched more carefully before involving you. That's on me. Novakovic will find this. Probably, and he'll use it to suggest I've been manipulating the Jurek relationship through you, using family connections to create inappropriate business advantages. He laughed bitterly. The irony is, I genuinely didn't know, but proving that is impossible. So what do? We separate, publicly, visibly. Make it clear that whatever personal relationship we had is over, that my business operations don't involve you anymore. Give him nothing to leverage. And privately, he looked at me for a long time. Privately, I need to trust that you understand why this is necessary. That I'm not abandoning you. I'm protecting you from blowback that could destroy everything you've built. Dante, I'll maintain your grandmother's treatment. That doesn't change. But Luna, for your own safety, you need to step away from me until this resolves. Create distance. Rebuild your life separately. If Novakovic decides to target you as collateral damage, I need to be able to demonstrate that you're not operationally involved in my organization. It was logical, strategic, and it felt like being erased. How long? I don't know, months probably, maybe longer. He reached out, cupping my face gently. I'm sorry. I brought you into this world and now I'm asking you to leave it. That's not fair. None of this is fair. No, but it's necessary. He kissed me once, gently, final, and walked away across the park, leaving me standing alone in April sunlight that felt too bright, too warm, too wrong for the ending happening around me. The separation was surgical. Within a week, I was removed from all official organizational documents, my email address deactivated, my access to Dante's offices and contacts severed. Sophia delivered a final payment, 6 months' salary, generous severance, plus a letter explaining that my contractor position had been terminated due to restructuring, nothing to do with performance. The letter was for official purposes. The note clipped to it in Dante's handwriting said only, "I'm sorry. This doesn't mean what it looks like. Trust me." But trust was expensive when you were alone again, when the infrastructure you'd built your life around suddenly disappeared. I returned to La Perla. Marco gave me my old section back without questions, and tried to pretend the last 6 months hadn't happened. Nana's treatment continued, paid through an anonymous foundation that I knew was Dante's money filtered through layers of legal protection. She improved steadily, reaching a plateau that Dr. Werner called remarkably stable given her initial prognosis. I was grateful. I was furious. I was both, constantly. May became June. I heard about Dante's situation only through rumors. Marco overheard things. Customers gossiped. The industry newspapers I started reading mentioned regulatory scrutiny of several import-export firms with Croatian partnerships. Dante's name never appeared, but I recognized the descriptions. Then in late June, Sophia called. "Don't hang up," she said immediately. "I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but Dante needs your help. Actually needs it, not just wants it. He made it very clear he didn't need me. Made it clear he couldn't afford to be seen needing you. There's a difference. Luna Novakovic has escalated. He's not just using regulatory pressure anymore. He's using institutional weapons. Financial police, anti-mafia prosecutors, the full weight of law enforcement trying to find something, anything, that proves Dante's operations are criminal rather than just aggressive. And they're looking at you. Specifically, they want to interview you about your relationship with Dante and the Jurek family." Cold washed through me. I didn't do anything illegal. I know, Dante knows, but Novakovic will frame your testimony however benefits him. If you say you and Dante were personally involved, he'll claim conflict of interest in business dealings. If you say you weren't, he'll produce evidence that you were and use the lie to discredit everything else you say. It's a trap. What does Dante want me to do? Meet with him, once. Neutral location. He has a proposal that protects you and potentially resolves the Novakovic situation permanently, but he can't make it work without your cooperation. And if I refuse? Then you deal with the prosecutors alone and Dante handles his problems his way and you both move forward separately. But Luna, her voice softened. He misses you, not just operationally, actually misses you. I've never seen him like this about anyone. That's worth something. I agreed to meet, adding how quickly I agreed, how desperately I wanted to see him again despite everything. We chose the same park in Sempione where we'd ended things, full circle that felt both poetic and painful. He looked thinner when he arrived, the stress of the past months visible in the sharp lines of his face. But his eyes lit when he saw me, genuine warmth that he didn't try to hide. "Luna," he didn't touch me, respecting the distance. "Thank you for coming. Sophia said you need help." "I do, but first, I'm sorry. For how I handled the separation, for the way I cut you out. It was necessary, but that doesn't make it right." "What do you need?" He gestured to a bench, and we sat at opposite ends, close enough to talk, far enough to maintain the careful boundaries he'd insisted on. Novakovic's weakness is his financing. He borrows heavily to fund his operations, and most of his lenders are international, banks that rely on clean regulatory relationships with EU institutions. If those banks believe he's deliberately manipulating regulatory processes for personal gain, they'll withdraw funding. Without financing, his expansion collapses. How do you prove manipulation? By demonstrating that his regulatory complaints are meritless, that all the documentation he's challenging is legitimate, and that his accusations are deliberate business warfare rather than good faith concern about compliance. He pulled out a folder. This is every contract, license, and financial record related to the Zurich relationship. All clean, all defensible, but prosecutors won't look at them unless someone they trust vouches for their legitimacy. Someone like me. You were present for the negotiations. You translated the agreements. You can testify that everything was conducted properly, with no coercion or manipulation of the Zurich family. Your testimony, combined with this documentation, proves Novakovic's accusations are fabricated. And if I testify, I'm back in the target zone. Only briefly. The moment you testify credibly, the prosecution's case against me collapses. Novakovic loses leverage with his banks. Within weeks, his financing evaporates and he's forced to liquidate positions at a loss. He becomes irrelevant. And what do I get out of this? He smiled slightly. Aside from ending the threat that's been hanging over both of us, your choice. If you want to walk away after, I'll set you up completely, education fully funded, Nana's treatment guaranteed for life, enough money that you never have to worry about security again. Clean break, no strings. Lord. Or you come back, not as my employee, as my partner, legally if you want it. Marriage, full integration into the organization, equal standing in everything I build going forward. Because Luna, he finally closed the distance, taking my hands. These 3 months without you have been the longest of my life. I built everything carefully, controlled every variable, eliminated every uncertainty. And then you appeared and made me want something I'd stopped believing I could have. Someone who sees everything I am and chooses to stay anyway. Not because they're trapped or obligated, but because they choose it. You're asking me to testify so we can be together. I'm asking you to testify because it's the right solution to multiple problems. What happens after is your choice. But yes, I'm hoping you'll choose to stay, this time knowing exactly what you're choosing. I looked at our hands, his warm and steady, mine trembling slightly despite my best effort to remain calm. I thought about Nana's warnings, about Marco's concern, about every rational voice that said men like Dante Kovac were hurricanes that destroyed everything in their path. But I also thought about the promises he'd kept, the ways he'd protected me even while pushing me away, the fact that he could have manipulated me into testifying, but instead laid out the situation clearly and let me choose. If I come back, I said slowly, I need real partnership, not just the title, actual equal standing. I make decisions about what I'm involved in. I build my own network separate from yours. I'm not just an extension of your organization. I'm my own entity within it. Done. And if I ever want to leave, you can, with everything I've promised and no hard feelings. Luna, I don't want you trapped. I want you choosing to stay every single day. That's the only kind of loyalty that matters. Then I'll testify, and after we'll see. We'll see. He kissed me then, relief and warmth and the careful control finally breaking into something more vulnerable. Thank you. The testimony took place in late July, in a prosecutor's office that felt designed to intimidate. I sat across from 2 detectives and an EU regulatory specialist, Dante's lawyer beside me, and walked them through every meeting, every contract, every moment of the Zurich negotiations. They tried to trap me, suggesting I'd been romantically involved during the business dealings, implying I'd had undue influence over Marco, pushing for any admission that Dante had coerced or manipulated the arrangements. But I'd been trained by months in rooms where every word carried weight, and I gave them nothing but clear, consistent testimony backed by documentation they couldn't refute. "Miss Merrick," the lead detective said finally, frustrated, "you're asking us to believe that a young woman with no business experience was hired purely for translation skills, despite substantial evidence that your relationship with Mr. Kovac extended beyond professional boundaries. I'm asking you to look at the documentation and recognize that every agreement was properly negotiated, properly executed, and properly recorded. When Mr. Kovac and I became personally involved is irrelevant to whether the business dealings were legitimate, which they were, completely. And your family's historical connection to the Jurek family, your great-uncle's relationship with Mr. Kovac's grandfather. You expect us to believe those weren't factors in establishing business relationships. I expect you to recognize that family history might explain why Marko Jurek felt comfortable working with Mr. Kovac's organization, but it doesn't change whether the business itself was conducted properly, which it was. If you have evidence otherwise, present it. If you don't, stop wasting everyone's time pursuing an investigation that's clearly motivated by commercial rivalry rather than legitimate regulatory concern." Dante's lawyer touched my arm gently, a warning not to push too hard, but I saw the detective's expression shift. Annoyance, yes, but also recognition that they had nothing substantive. The interview ended an hour later. Within 2 weeks, the prosecution dropped its investigation, citing insufficient evidence of regulatory violation. Within a month, Novakovic's primary lenders withdrew financing, citing concerns about business practices. By September, he'd liquidated most of his Croatian positions at a loss and retreated to smaller operations in the Balkans. "It's done," Dante told me when Sophia confirmed the last piece had fallen into place. "You're clear, we're clear, and Luka Novakovic is no longer a factor." "What about his vendetta against your father?" "Some battles end not with victory, but with the other side losing interest. He's financially wounded enough that going after me now would be throwing good money after bad. He'll move on to easier targets." We were in his apartment, our apartment now. I'd moved back in last week, slowly reclaiming the space I'd occupied before everything had fractured. It felt different now, though. Less like a beautiful cage, more like a choice I was making with clear eyes. "Nana wants to meet you properly," I said. "Dinner next week. Formal introduction, not just the distant acknowledgement from before." "I'd like that." He pulled me close, the gesture now familiar, comfortable. "How is she?" "Stable. Wanting to go back to Makarska for a visit. She hasn't been since before the wars. I thought maybe we could arrange that. Take her to the places she knew when she was young, when she was engaged to your grandfather. To close that circle. To acknowledge it, at least. Our families have been circling each other for 60 years. Seems like we should honor that connection instead of pretending it doesn't exist." "I'd like that too." So in October, we went to Croatia, not for business but for history. Nana sat on the seawall in Makarska where she'd made promises to a young man named Ivan Kovac and told stories about the fishing cooperative, about choices made and lives diverged, about how sometimes the things you run from circle back in your grandchildren's generation. "Do you regret it?" I asked her, "leaving Ivan?" "No, I chose life over legacy, safety over structure. It was the right choice for me." She looked at Dante, who stood nearby giving us space. "But that doesn't mean it was wrong for Ivan to stay, or that it's wrong for you to choose differently than I did. Every generation makes their own peace with how much danger they can carry." That night, Dante and I walked the same coastal path Nana had described. Moonlight on water, the Adriatic patient and eternal, the smell of salt and stone and lives lived across decades. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm choosing the storm, deliberately, with full knowledge of what it costs. And that I'm okay with that, as long as we keep the boundaries we've set, as long as I remain my own person within your world. Always. He stopped walking, turning me to face him. Luna, I mean that. I don't want to absorb you into my organization. I want you beside me, challenging me, keeping me honest when the structure gets too rigid. Can you do that? I've been doing it for almost a year now. Then keep doing it. Forever, preferably. But I'll take tomorrow if that's all you're committing to. Try a year. We'll renegotiate after. He laughed, genuine, warm, the sound carrying out over the water. A year, then negotiation. I can work with that. The year that followed was education in partnership, not the kind where one person leads and the other follows, but the kind where two people build something together while maintaining their individual integrities. I enrolled in university part-time, finishing my degree in international business with a minor in Eastern European studies. Dante funded it without question, and I let him, because I'd finally learned that accepting help wasn't the same as surrendering autonomy. I built my own network separate from his, relationships with other translators, with academics studying post-Yugoslav business culture, with women who'd navigated similar worlds and survived. They became my reality check, my reminder that I could leave if I needed to, that staying was choice rather than trap. And I continued working with Dante's organization, but on my terms. I coordinated the Croatian relationships, developed new partnerships in Slovenia and Austria, became the person who understood cultural nuances that determined whether deals succeeded or failed. Not his assistant, his partner. The distinction mattered. Nana's health plateaued at a level that let her enjoy life, daily walks, cooking elaborate meals, video calls with cousins in Croatia she'd rediscovered through our Makarska trip. Dr. Werner called it remarkable stability and attributed it to the treatment protocol, but I thought it was something more. She'd made peace with old choices, closed the circle with Ivan Kovac's memory, and released the guilt she'd carried about leaving. In December, exactly 1 year after the separation and reunion, Dante proposed. Not dramatically. We were in his office reviewing quarterly reports, the most mundane of settings, but perfectly for us. The year's up, he said, setting aside his tablet. Time to renegotiate. What terms are you offering? Marriage, legal partnership in the organization, joint ownership of properties, and a prenuptial agreement that guarantees you walk away with everything you've built independently if things ever go wrong. You're offering me an exit route in your proposal. I'm offering you honesty. Luna, I love you, but I also respect you too much to pretend marriage to me doesn't come with risks. So I'm mitigating those risks legally, ensuring that choosing me doesn't mean sacrificing the autonomy you've built. Take it or leave it. But know that if you take it, you're getting all of me. The legitimate business, the gray spaces, the weight of my family's history. All of it. I thought about that first night at La Perla Nera, about snow and invisibility, and the moment Dante's gaze had marked me as someone worth seeing. I thought about every promise kept, every boundary respected, every moment he'd chosen partnership over possession. Yes, I said, but I want one addition to the terms. Name it. We build something legitimate together, not just gray spaces and aggressive business, something clean, something I can be proud of without qualification. An educational foundation, maybe, for young people from communities like the one I came from. Something that uses your resources and my experience to create opportunities without exploitation. Done anything else. Make an honest woman of me in the eyes of the Italian bureaucracy. I want the tax benefits. He laughed, pulling me close. Mercenary to the end. God, I love you. We married in January, small ceremony in Como with immediate family only. Nana in attendance. Dante's mother surprisingly warm. Marco and Katerina Jurek, representing the Croatian connection that had brought us together across generations. It felt less like a wedding and more like a treaty signing between allied powers, which was probably appropriate for what we were. The foundation launched in March, small at first, but growing, providing scholarships and business training for young people from working-class backgrounds across northern Italy and the Balkans. I ran it independently, building the staff and structure without Dante's direct involvement, proving to myself I could create something valuable outside his shadow. And in April, when spring came again to Milan, and La Perla Nera started outdoor seating on the terrace where I'd once been invisible, Dante and I had dinner there. Me as his wife now, him as the man who'd seen me when I was trying not to be seen. Regrets, he asked over Barolo that no longer felt impossibly expensive. About us, no, about the path that brought us here, sometimes, but not tonight. Tonight. Tonight I'm exactly where I choose to be. Tomorrow I might choose differently. But that's what makes it real, isn't it? The daily choosing. Every single day, he agreed, raising his glass. To choosing and to choosing well. We drank, and across the restaurant I saw Marco watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Approval, maybe, or simply acknowledgement that I'd navigated dangerous waters and arrived somewhere stable. Not perfect, not safe, but mine in all the ways that mattered. Epilogue. 3 years later, Nana died peacefully in her sleep, her health sustained to the end by treatments that had given her 4 good years she wouldn't have had otherwise. I sat beside her bed as she passed, holding her hand while spring rain fell on Milan streets outside. "No regrets," I whispered. She'd squeezed my hand once, a final affirmation, and let go. We buried her in Makarska, beside her parents and grandparents, returning her to the coast she'd loved and left. Dante arranged everything quietly, his organizational efficiency turned toward grief rather than business. At the graveside, I found myself standing beside Marco Jurek, both of us looking at stone markers for people who'd built the lives we'd inherited. "Your grandmother was brave," Marco said, "leaving everything she knew, building something new. Most people don't have that courage." "Did you know Ivan Kovic well, Dante's grandfather?" "A little. He was a good man, but hard. The kind who couldn't let go of what he'd built even when it was killing him. Your grandmother saw that early, made the hard choice to leave. I always respected her for it." "And now?" "Now you're making your own choices. Different ones than hers, but informed by what she taught you. That's all any of us can do, learn from our elders and decide where to plant our own roots." I thought about that on the flight back to Milan, about choices and roots, about the difference between being trapped and being committed. Dante reached across the aisle, taking my hand without speaking, and I let him, because I'd finally learned that accepting comfort wasn't the same as surrendering strength. The foundation was thriving by then. 3 offices across Italy and Croatia, partnerships with universities, a graduation rate that made me quietly proud. I ran it full-time now, having stepped back from most of Dante's organizational work to focus on building something entirely mine. He supported it without interference, proud of what I'd created independent of him. "You're making me legitimate by association," he joked once. "You're already legitimate. I'm just giving you a soul." We never had children. That was a mutual choice, both of us too aware that the life we'd built came with inherited dangers we didn't want to pass forward another generation. Instead, we invested in other people's children, in creating opportunities that didn't require the compromises we'd made. And sometimes, late at night in the apartment we'd made into home, I'd think about that snowy December evening at La Perla Nera and wonder what would have happened if I'd said no. If I'd refused his card, refused his offer, refused to let invisibility become visibility. Would I have been safer? Probably. Happier? I honestly didn't know. But I knew I wouldn't trade what I'd built. Not the foundation, not the partnership, not even the complicated legacy of violence and grace that came with loving a man like Dante Kovac. Because somewhere in the careful negotiation of our relationship, I'd learned that security wasn't the same as safety, and that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the most honest one. "What are you thinking about?" Dante asked one night, finding me at the window watching Milan's lights spread across the darkness. "Beginnings," I said, "and how we never really see them clearly until we've traveled far enough away to look back. Regrets. Questions. Would I make the same choices again? Would you?" He considered that seriously, the way he considered everything that mattered. "I think so, though I'd try to hurt you less along the way, cause less damage in the process of building what we have now. The damage was necessary. It taught us what we could survive." Is that wisdom or rationalization? Both, probably both. He laughed, pulling me away from the window and back into the warmth of our life together. And I went, because I'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing wasn't walking away from danger but walking toward it with clear eyes, choosing the storm knowing exactly what the rain would cost. Outside, snow began to fall on Milan, the first of the season, soft and silent, covering the city in white that looked pure until morning came and revealed it was just water, just temporary, just another layer on a world that was never as clean as it appeared. But for tonight, in the warm space we'd carved from cold streets and dangerous choices, it was enough to have chosen well, to have built something worth protecting, to stand beside someone who saw you completely and stayed anyway. That was its own kind of victory, however complicated. That was its own kind of home.